Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNativeBloodyElbow.com, joined once again by Zane Simon. Zane, I don't even have any reason to call you an idiot tonight, yet. But are we gonna have to resort to name calling?
I don't know. I can't tell you how to be classier, so I'm gonna assume that you'll go with like the the
I'm just
lowest.
gonna go with the facts and the same perspective. So I gotta say, Bigfoot Silva clearly needed the TRT. He's the one guy who had any kind of plausible medical explanation for why he needed testosterone replacement therapy because of his pituitary gland issues. Since he's quit, it's like he's a ghost of himself. Frank Mir just steamrolled him in the main event of UFC Fight Night, Porto Alegre, Brazil.
Yeah,
Um, Bad night for the Brazilians. Edson Barboza also lost. Mutante Ferreira lost. Adriano Martins was the highest placed on the card Brazilian to get a win, upsetting Rustam Khabilov. But Jessica Andrade got smoked, got submitted in the first round. William Macario got knocked out. Bad night for Brazil.
yeah.
Good night for anybody?
Um, Great night for Michael Johnson, I would
That was an
say.
impressive performance. I would say Henry Hooft of the Black Zillion striking coach is the secret sauce there.
Yeah, Michael Johnson, Frankie Saenz, and Adriano Martins all had a wonderful and amazing night. And Frank Mir had an amazing night, especially if like he's not planning on fighting a lot more, because that would be a great way to kind of walk out of everything.
Yeah, yeah, unless he gets a third shot at Brock Lesnar, which is too much money to walk away from, even
Yeah.
for Frank Mir, I would think. But yeah, I mean, Bigfoot had nothing. Mir walked over him. I mean, what else to say about it? Mir hasn't won since 2011. The excitement about the fight is, oh boy, Frank Mir can go out on top. That doesn't take us anywhere.
No, it's pretty. Like I just tweeted this off our Twitter account over on the Bloody Elbow Twitter, and like we're talking about a guy who not that who dominated Fedor in Bigfoot,
Yeah,
like
crush Fedor.
crushed Fedor, and he's losing back to back to Andrei Arlovsky and Frank Mir in 2015 and 2014 in the first round by
Yeah.
knockout.
And this is a guy who used to look like he was made out of solid concrete, both in a bad way, being slow, but in a good way, just being solid as a rock. I mean, Alistair Overeem beat him up for a long time and couldn't finish him and
Yeah, I
got
mean
knocked out.
Mark Hunt and he went back and forth for 3 rounds, trading every blow imaginable, and now he's just made out of glass. I mean,
Yeah, it might be that Hunt fight. I mean, it might not be the TRT at all. It might be a combination. I mean, sometimes when you have a big war like
yeah,
that, you take a lot of head trauma, and your chin goes away. But whatever it is, it's sad to see. Bigfoot's always seemed like a pretty likable guy. And
yeah.
I really, at this point, I mean, I don't know who in the heavyweight division I would want to see him fight next.
No, I hope. Like, I don't. I'm not gonna say he has to retire because I don't know what his financial situation is. I don't know if he's really capable of retiring. Maybe he's not. But I hope that his camp is telling him to retire because I have trouble believing that they let him walk into this fight as frail as he is. Like, I can't imagine watching him in that last fight and then watching him in training and being like, yeah, get back out there. Like, it
Yeah, if he
just,
looked anything like he's looked in his last two fights in training, it's really hard to fathom, how a team could send him back out there unless they're just soulless cannibals that are, willing to send their paycheck out there to keep paying him. Maybe they're just like everybody else, willing to do what it takes to make a buck. I don't know, but let's talk about a happier fight. The only fight that really mattered to me on this card going in, lightweights, Michael Johnson, Edson Barboza in a welcome to contention match for the winner. Michael Johnson, I think from the very first exchange, established that he had the footwork to solve Edson Barboza, that he had done his homework. He knew that if you rush Barboza, if you crowd Barboza, you don't let him set up, you don't let him do cast his magic, you don't let him get those big kicks off, you can take him out of his game. Johnson doesn't have the power to just spank him, but he dominated him and got the unanimous decision, won all 3 rounds on 2 judges' cards.
yeah, it was a great performance. It was exactly the kind of performance he needs. I mean, and this is one of those things like we've been seeing this a little, I would say, with the lightweight division. Not nearly as much as we tend to see it with some of the other divisions, but like there's been this feeling like there are a lot of young guys that are getting up to like the top top 15 range and then really failing to take that next step. I mean, we had Bobby Green, who recently fought Edson Barboza and fell back. We've had Rustam Khabilov fall back. We've had Miles Jury fall back. And this was a big fight for Johnson to really establish. It was the kind of consistent performance that really says, I should be able to compete and beat a top 15 level of competitor consistently.
Yeah, I mean Barboza's been in the top 10 for a while, and Johnson dominated him thoroughly. And looking at the guys that are ahead of him, I mean, I see Johnson catapulting up the rankings ahead of Jim Miller, Eddie Alvarez, Bobby Green, Miles Jury. I mean, these are all guys coming off losses. I don't remember what Miller's done lately, but that says it all. Josh Thompson's injured. Edson Barboza, he's going to jump past. And then at that point, beyond that, you're in the high altitude. You're in the rarefied air with Anthony Pettis, Rafael Dos Anjos, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Donald Cerrone, Gilbert Melendez, and Vincent Henderson in the top 5. I mean, I don't know that he's ready for those cats, but he's got nowhere else to go. He's earned his shot, and he's called out Vincent Henderson, which would be a very interesting fight.
Yeah, that was a great call out. I mean, I think Henderson's kind of at the money weight fight point of his career. And so even if he doesn't get that fight, even if Henderson, but Henderson's also in a position where not only is he fighting whatever division is going to make him money the quickest, but he's also been in a division where he wants to turn around as fast as possible and get as many fights as possible. That seems like where he is right now. So calling him out, I mean, it's a little like calling out Donald Cerrone. It's just a really good career move right now if you want to get your name in a big money fight, whether you win or lose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think Johnson's not somebody that Benson's going to be afraid of, although there's not a huge upside for Benson to beat Michael Johnson. But, a good call out. You got a guy in Benson Henderson who's coming off a big win against a welterweight in his last bout. So fun stuff. And it's Michael Johnson doesn't have a killer weapon, but he's a well-rounded fighter who can execute a game plan, and the striking coaching that those guys are getting at the Black Zillions camp is really amazing. I mean, I noticed, he was charging in on Barboza. He wasn't letting him get set up. He was frequently missing with hooks just by a little bit, or leaving himself open to what I thought would be big counters, but never took the kill shot. He would back off before it was too late, and he frequently was in range and did connect with the hook. So I don't think he executed the game plan perfectly, but I think it was such a good game plan that even with a slightly flawed execution, it really worked its magic, and that was fun to see. But where does this leave Edson Barboza? I mean, this is just a guy who seems like he can't win the big fight. Ever since he lost his first fight to Jamie Varner, he's just kind of sputtered around.
Yeah, I think this does a lot less damage for him than a big KO loss would have. The fact that he went all 15 minutes in an exciting fight still, to me, leaves him like as firmly a top 10, borderline top 10 fighter, the kind of guy that, could then go turn around and fight Miles Jury or fight somebody else clawing for that kind of top 10 contention and be a really tough, fun fight there, and he might win those fights. I don't think it's going to be like, it's not like the Khabilov fight where it's suddenly like you've lost 2 in a row and you were a fringe top 15 guy and now you may have to take a big step down and climb a lot further. I think he stays right at the top of the division, but it does, like, he's a fighter with known flaws, and it does reaffirm that if you fight and you take advantage of those flaws, he's beatable.
Absolutely, and I like the sound of that Miles Jury fight. I think that would be a good test for two guys coming off a loss. Jury looked like a boy against a man in his loss to Donald Cerrone, and Edson Barboza is no easier an opponent. So that would be a fun fight and a big test for Jury and a big test for Barboza. And now let's talk about Rustam Khabilov. Lost to Adriano Martinez, and just flat got out wrestled, and that's supposed to be his wheelhouse. And just split decision. So one of the judges liked what he saw there. All three of the judges gave Khabilov at least one round. But I was very impressed by Martin's performance. This is a guy who's been flying under the radar, big underdog in this fight, and he's up, Khabilov's down.
Yeah, we recently, I know, sort of, it's coming out soon, I believe, that we did sort of a response, pick your 5 underrated fighters, most underrated fighters in the UFC. post as sort of a response to the Shab Bisping video that they did, and Martins was one of my five, and this fight was why. I mean, the thing is that he's not bad anywhere. He's a good striker, he's a good wrestler, he's a good grappler. He's just never quite meshed that into a consistent performing style against top level competition. But he showed that if he could when he could shut down Khabilov's wrestling, the rest of the fight was his. And I think that's one of the things with the Sambo guys. I get really into watching them, and I think a lot of them are really great, amazing prospects. But the style of striking that a lot of them end up with is just sort of these huge, big, one-off dynamic strikes from the outside. And more studied, more consistent strikers can elude that. And then if they can shut down that wrestling game that a lot of them bring, they're not great grapplers and they're not great strikers. So, you're really basing a skill on your dynamic wrestling ability. And
And phase
Martinez
shifting.
was able to expose that.
And I think that's a key point. I mean, combat sambo in some aspects is the best, most MMA-like preparatory sport, but because of the rule set, because of the limited time on the ground, it creates a sort of jack of all trades, master of none style fighter. And we've seen that it can be immensely successful. Some of the greatest fighters of all time, Fedor and Emelianenko, obviously, are based in that style. But when they run into a specialist or somebody who can shut down one of their key weapons, sometimes they just look outclassed, and it's a bad run for Khabilov. And like you said, I mean, this is a guy who was ranked 14th coming into this fight. I mean, the guys down there with him, George Masvidal and Iaquinta are both more on the rise. I don't know. What's Jim Miller doing in his last fight? Is he coming off a loss or a win?
Oh, Jim, I gotta think he's coming off a loss, but I don't remember exactly who he fought last. He fought and lost to Donald Cerrone.
Yeah, and so I think Miller might be a logical fight for Khabilov, and that's kind of a loser leaves the top 15 kind of bout, and the winner gets to hang around.
I don't know. I think after this loss to Martins, he's already out of the top 15 and is going to maybe be down fighting guys like Darren Cruikshank, and we already mentioned you mentioned George Masvidal, but he's already in the top 15. But he's going to be out. He's going to be fighting some of those really tough, maybe like Francisco Trinaldo and some of those other really tough guys that are swimming around the top third of the division, but not in that top 15.
Guys with no name value, and I could see that. I mean, why would Jim Miller take on Usman Khabilov? It's a very tough fight and not a money fight and not a big name fight. So, yeah, good points. So let's run through the rest of the card. Go bottom up. Yvonne George beat Josh Shockley. I can't remember if we've seen. I remember seeing Josh Shockley before, but I just don't want to see the guy again. Ever since my punk rock days, I've always rooted for White Boy with dreadlocks to take a beating. That has not changed. He's lost twice in the UFC. I predict that they bring him back just because they're bringing everybody back. But my God. And then to show that fight twice, I couldn't believe when I had to watch that fight twice. So Yvonne George wins a unanimous decision in a totally unremarkable fight. But then you had Douglas Silva de Andrade, the first fight on the Fox Sports 1 card, beat Cody Gibson unanimous decision. Thoughts on that fight?
I think that's one of the cases where you have a wrestler that's learning to round out his game and has suddenly fallen in love with his striking. And that was sort of what I saw out of Cody Gibson, was a guy who was like, I can hang with this guy in the feet. I can take his best shots. And yeah, he could for like a round. And then suddenly that became over time, just the huge power differential between De Silva and Gibson just started to wear on Gibson. And he couldn't keep up for all 15 minutes. And it just...
that's the thing with head trauma. It's cumulative. And you add that with exhaustion, and just a bad look for Cody Gibson. Pretty good performance by De Silva, but whatever. And then we had featherweight Mike De La Torre demolished Jago Tractor in the first round TKO. Does that mean anything?
It was a it's a big win for De La Torre. It keeps him relevant. I think it keeps his UFC career alive, coming off a loss and a no contest. I could see if Trator just ran through him, that could be the end of his time in the UFC. So I think it's a stay afloat win. It's a bad loss for Trator, who I actually had some hope for being a rising fighter in the division. But it
It was a
exposes
bad
some
night
big.
for Brazilian prospects. Just a lot of hopes got dashed tonight.
Yeah, a bad night for Brazilian prospects, and it exposed some holes in his grinding inside sort of wall and maul game that you know De La Torre was able to hook up with him there and just bomb on him. Trator
Yep.
couldn't control him, and once he couldn't control him, it was just a bad fight for him.
Yeah, and then pretty much similar story. Welterweight Matt Dwyer smoked William Macario with a Superman punch. No, not much to say about it. First round knockout. You said before the fight, Macario, this was his sort of last chance to remain somebody with some sizzle as an up and coming prospect, and those hopes fizzled. Man, the sizzle done fizzled. That's all I got to say on
Yeah.
that.
I mean, I thought Macario was winning that fight up until he lost it. He did look technically better. He was outboxing Dwyer, but it's that idea of like when he's the more technical fighter, but he's not so much more technical that he can get away with the holes in his game. And Dwyer is big and powerful and aggressive, and that was too
And
much.
when
I
you're
mean,
and when you're biting on low kicks like that, I mean the Superman punch is there. His coach called for
yeah,
it. He fired it, and game over. And then another big upset to finish up the preliminary card. Jessica Andrade looked fearsome early on,
yep,
blitzing Marion Reneau on the feet. And this is a mistake a young overconfident fighter makes. You get it in the triangle and get yourself out once, and then seconds later you're back in it. It's like back away, stay away. What are you doing?
yeah, that's a huge, huge mistake for Andrade, and shows that she's still got a lot of developing to do as a prospect. I mean, she's only been fighting since 2011, so there's definitely room for her to continue to improve. This isn't like,
Yeah, and she's very young, only 23 years old.
yeah, this isn't the death knell on her career as a prospect or even a future title contender. She's still got years to develop into that. But this was that reality check of, your aggression is really useful in winning most of your fights, but she just chased somebody to the ground that was much better than her there and did it and didn't let up when she was in obvious danger. So it's a great
Yeah,
win for
and
Reneau.
somebody who had nothing for her on the feet. I mean, if
Yeah.
she had backed away, let a stunned Marion Reneau stumble back to her feet, she probably could have got a knockout. And as it is, she's going to have a lot to think about tonight. And Marion Reneau, this gal is tough. I mean, very
Yeah.
skilled, very tough. Not a hugely exciting prospect at age 37, but definitely a force to be reckoned with in the division. I mean, somebody that's got gatekeeper written all over her.
Well, she's athletic, and the women's MMA is at the point where athleticism is still queen, I guess you'd say. I mean, it's still like the most important part of being a winning fighter in women's MMA is being athletic enough, and she is
Yeah, I mean
athletic
that's
enough.
what separates the current crop of women's bantamweights from the Rosie Sextons of the previous era.
Yeah,
Just
and even the top 5 from the bottom 20. It's the at the top you have to have this certain level of athleticism. Kat Zingano and um, Sarah McMahon and Ronda Rousey and even Misha Tate. They're all like much better than average athletes for the division. And so I think Renault has that, and it's just for her. I think it's all about staying on track to get it to the top as fast as possible for somebody in her position. She doesn't have
yeah,
she may not have years to build and develop her career. So it's
I'd say
about
she has 2 years tops.
I mean,
Uh,
it's hard to know with MMA because this sport really does treat age differently than most other pro sports.
it's
But
true, and women's MMA's in the baby days, and Randy Couture famously started his career in his mid 30s and went on for a decade. So of course that was in a different drug testing environment than we've got now. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see what Renault does, and I
yeah,
expect it's just a back to the drawing board thing for Andrade. I don't think it's a fatal misstep, but it's definitely a step back. Now on to the main card: Santiago Ponzinibbio won me over, beating Sean Strickland by unanimous decision. Ponzinibbio, this is a guy whose last name is so hard to spell. I just hate blogging about this cat. But he's won me over. I thought that was a gutsy performance. Not a great fight or anything, but it was entertaining. And Strickland was game. But Ponzinibbio just hits hard and likes to brawl. He's kind of won me over in his last couple fights.
Yeah, I mean, and like I keep saying this about him, but he's actually like got a better takedown to ground and pound game than anything. But he just loves to brawl so much, and we even saw flashes of that where he hit some big double legs and would land some hard shots from top position. But I think my big thing is, and I like Ponzinibbio's game. I think he's a fun brawler. He's got lots of power. He's got a good wrestling game. He's good from top control. Like his game fits together, and it all works well. So he can be a strong fighter. I don't know about potential like title contender or even top 15 guy, but top third of the division kind of guy. The thing to me that just strikes me is that Sean Strickland's game is just much better built for middleweight. I mean, Ponzinibbio is kind of like a middle of the pack welterweight, and he gave Strickland way more trouble than Strickland's ever had at middleweight. And it's just one of those times where it's like, if you're really only gonna jab and stick and move, the lower weight divisions are not made for that kind of fight.
No. And Strickland's young, and he's going to be getting bigger and putting on more mass. And the whole move down to welterweight, I think, was ill-conceived, and he would be much better off back among the Bubba McDaniels of the middleweight division. It's just a less athletic division, frankly.
Yeah, like there are fewer guys that can track him down and throw a left hook, head kick, body shot combo. The kind of thing that Ponzinibbio was, just winging out there. Like, how many middleweights can you think of that can do that outside the top 10 or 15 guys?
Not a lot.
No.
Not a lot at all. So, back to the drawing board for Strickland. His first loss. I don't think it's a career record. This is a young kid, but big win for Ponzinibbio. And then that brings us to bantamweight. Frankie Saenz beats Yuri Alcantara. Alcantara landed some big shots, but very frustrating for any fan of Alcantara. I mean, this is a guy who's perpetually teased that he's a potential contender in the bantamweight division, and now losing this fight. I mean, not a good look for a potential.
Yeah, this is probably a sign that as a fighter that's been competing since 2003, Alcantara's best days are probably starting to be behind him before he ever really capitalized on his, his top like contender potential. I think at some point he probably was a top contender, but we may have already
against Uriah Faber, but
yeah. That may have been like the end of the peak, and then we're kind of seeing the fall off here. It's just, and I picked him by split decision. I thought that Saenz was actually a really bad stylistic matchup for him, but that Alcantara's athleticism would see him through. And instead, Alcantara I think he spent too much time. He didn't spend enough time aggressively trying to outstrike Saenz early and got himself hooked up in too many wrestling exchanges and let Saenz have enough time to throw some big shots of his own and just tired him out really quickly. And once Alcantara was tired, the chances of him outworking Saenz at any point were dismal.
Yeah, I mean, he just fought Saenz' fight and let it get away from him. And I don't think Saenz really... I mean, Saenz just showed he was a gritty, skilled competitor that if you play his game, he's going to beat you. But, I don't know that he's I don't see a big upside for Saenz, is what I'm saying. But let's move on to the one fight we haven't covered. Middleweight, Sam Alvey smoked Cesar Mutante Ferreira. It was all Ferreira until the last two punches from Alvey, and boy, were those two punches vicious.
I tweeted out before this fight that if there's one underdog on this card that I would never pick to win, it's Sam Alvey. Like, of this whole card, I could make cases for Saenz, I could make cases for Martins, I could make cases for Johnson and Dwyer and Ponzinibbio and Reneau, but Alvey, I just didn't see it at all. And
now
all
you've seen
credit
it.
to him,
It was a beautiful 1-2 combination. I mean, two hooks that just killed Ferreira. I mean, and I don't know. what this means. I mean, it definitely gives Alvey a bit of a career. I mean, he's got
Yeah.
2 straight wins in the UFC, both of them by knockouts, comeback knockouts. So he's a fun fighter. He's clearly got some deadly weapons in his arsenal. I don't see a huge upside, but fuck, let's ride the string out and see where it goes, you know. And then as for Mutant, I mean, he's 30. This is his second loss in the UFC. Lost to CB Dalloway badly. The second time he's been knocked out. His wins have not been, other than the first submission win against Jago Santos, it's been decision wins. So I'm writing the dude off as any kind of potential contender.
Yeah, this is like, when this is the division that Strickland, as a promising up-and-comer, left. Is a division where guys like Mutanch are top prospects, and they are just failing at every turn.
Yeah, and something like Sam Alvey can be an improbable success story, and it's just why would you leave that division?
Yeah. For happily, I think for me, I like Sam Alvey. I think he seems like a good dude, and when he wins, he can win excitingly. This is the difference between having a 2 or 3 fight UFC career and having like a 7 or 8 fight UFC career. Is you get those first couple of wins and you make them exciting enough that suddenly they're willing to give you more fights. They're willing to keep you around. So I'm glad that he's opened that door to himself and can really take some time to try and win fights and make something for himself. But for Ferreira, I mean, he'll get more fights and he will continue to be competitive in the middleweight division, but he's definitely now back into the mix of just another guy.
Yeah,
and Andrew Craig and Rafael Natal and just Tom Watson and a division full of guys that are just there.
Yeah. And where's the talent pipeline? I mean, they've got the Ultimate Fighter. That's their concept. You feed guys to the Ultimate Fighter. That's supposed to stock the UFC with stars and contenders. And I have this vision of the Brazilian talent pool. There's a pipe in the well, and the water level drops, and you've just got a pipe sucking air. I mean, where's the Brazilian talent? Where are the future Anderson Silvas? What's going on?
Brazil has ended up, I think, being a really picked over market. It's a market that every promotion in the world is drawing from. And I'm not just talking like UFC and Bellator, but ONE FC, KSW, M1 Global. Everybody's got their hands in Brazil looking for talented fighters to fill out their cards. And at some point, you just, you hit a bottom of the barrel, and Brazil's not producing the kind of continuous flow of hot prospects that I think you'd expect just on the basis of they're a major MMA country with tons of guys competing. It's like, yeah,
a huge population. I mean, and a long tradition, a lot of good fight camps. But yeah, it's just, I think a lot of the best athletes are going into soccer in Brazil, and
I don't even think it's that. It's just the difference of you look at Russia or Poland or some of these countries where we know there are a bunch of guys to go out and get that are going to be good top tier fighters. There are major walls to them going out to other promotions. We don't see them getting out. KSW gives guys enough money to not make them want to leave, and getting a visa to get out of Russia and get to other promotions is just a major chore. So there are big things that keep this talent walled up. With Brazil, they're going everywhere, and suddenly all that potential talent is just out in the world. I mean, it's like if you scrape the U.S. for prospects, we consistently produce more guys, and Brazil will continue to produce more guys, but it's not like every guy you go out and grab out of the U.S. is going to be a top contender,
No, definitely not. Definitely not. All right, well, I mean, that's the card. That's the show. I don't think there's any reason to belabor this with more blab, but we're going to have UFC 184 next Saturday. Ronda Rousey defending her title against Kat Zingano, and Holly Holm making her debut. A fight card that was supposed to feature Chris Weidman versus Vitor Belfort. Now it's Ronda Rousey carrying the whole thing on her shoulders. You also got Jake Ellenberger and Josh Koscheck. We'll be back Eugene will have Knuckle Up tomorrow. We'll have the Care Don't Care preview. We'll have the vivisection. We'll have the prospectus. All the fixins. So stay tuned to MMANation.com on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at @TheZaneSimon, @KidNate. Read us on BloodyElbow.com. And adios, MMA aficionados. Thanks, Zane.